So welcome everyone to today's seminar. Before we begin, and as always for WOMEESA events, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country and their connections to land, sea and community. We acknowledge Māori as Te Ngāta Whenua and Te Tiriti o Waitangi partners in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we pay our respects to Indigenous elders past and present and extend that respect to traditional owners joining us today. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the GSA, Geoscience Indigenous Collaboration and Engagement Specialist Group, for their support in organising today's event and for helping us to create opportunities for learning and collaboration across events through the GSA. If anyone isn't familiar with GICE, you can check them out through their website. It's a specialist group, so if you're a GSA member, then you can have your affiliation connected to that specialist group. They're doing really fantastic work. I'm now going to hand over to our WOMEESA treasurer, Romana, who's going to introduce today's speaker.
So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Humera Rind. Humera is a proud Bunny Maya Yamaji woman. Sorry, I think I got very nervous on that one, from Western Australia. She's an experienced environmental scientist and certified environmental auditor. Humera is a First Nations empowerment expert committed to providing high-level community engagement, strategic direction, and First Nation outcomes consistent with contemporary science in water, land, heritage, and air. She is currently the Indigenous Science and Research Development Manager with CSIRO in Worley, Perth. Her goal is to see Indigenous communities not just participating in science, but leading the way on projects that matter to them. So we're very excited to have her here today with us to share experience. So please join me in welcoming Humera.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Romana. Can you hear me all okay? Loud?
Yep.
Yep. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people on their land which I live and work, and I pay my respect to their past, present and emerging leaders. And I also like to pay respect to my own people, and I'm very grateful for Whadjuk Noongar people for having us on their country, and acknowledge my ancestors past, present and future for their persistent endeavour that I sit proud today among non-Indigenous people at the same level. So hats off. Thank you everyone for having me. As you heard, I'm Humera Rind. I'm a Badamaya Yamaji woman from Midwest, Western Australia, Mount Magnet, Murchison, Gascoyne. That's kind of our region. You all know about Murchison radio astronomy site. That's basically on our country. So it's a great country and it's a lot of flowers at the moment. I would like you all to go and visit if you are in WA and enjoy the school holidays, traveling on the Midwest roads and enjoying the wildflowers. So my heritage is, my background is basically in environmental science. I was the first woman to study science in my family. My mother is blind, so other than support, she couldn't help me with my education. Dad also year 10, so I studied. It took me a long time to finish my degree, so I grew up in the mountain regions of southern Iran, which is my other heritage, and that's where I gained a lot of interest in rocks and geology. At first, I thought I'm going to study geology, but when I went to study it, I didn't enjoy it to the level I wanted to. but I did a diploma in geology, which is still strong in me, and I'm a keen mineral collector, have a big collection of rocks and minerals. So I love geology, but I just couldn't see myself that I will be digging earth, So environmental science was the path I took, and how we can balance it. So, someone is digging, I am balancing, both working together hand in hand. So I thought this is a good balance for me to be. So I worked in the mining for 7 years with BHP, from construction, operation, closure, name it. I even developed the soil inventory of the rivers of nickel mine. And then I became a compliance inspector, where I got the auditor certification, used to inspect mine sites across, you name any mine site, I have been there and inspected it in WA. And then after that, went to defense and worked in the EPBC law. So as an Indigenous person working in a mostly non-Indigenous environment, it was a challenge for me, highlighting, balancing my culture and doing approvals, decision-making, especially in the regulatory framework. It was very hard for me because culturally, we have a lot of respect for each other's country. And it's my moral, cultural obligation to ask permission for anyone's entering to anyone's country. So it was very difficult for me to sit on the decision table, do a environmental impact assessment and say approve. So and at the time there was no awareness of Aboriginal rights. When I say Aboriginal, because in WA that's the term mostly used. Indigenous is a collective term. So there was no recognition of Indigenous rights in the regulatory framework, although the legislation does talk about it. The definition of environment is very clear, but the way the framework is done, so it was challenging for me a lot. So then the work changed, and the society was changing, the Reconciliation Action Plan came in, and this is where it all started. And then I had a lot of cultural load when I was in the government agency, because I was the only person, So this is kind of my journey in the regulation and things. This is where I picked up that we can do mining, we can develop industry, we can do environmentalist impact assessment, but we have to involve Indigenous people in our decision making, because they know the country from inside out, and they are the best people to tell us where things are. I know in the gold country, it was the Indigenous people who showed the gold and the nickel to the settlers, where is gold, where is nickel, what they are. So mining existed in our culture, but it was a barter. I have something, I share it with you, give me some. It wasn't so it was a shared benefit model that existed for thousands of years. So current systems the capital flight is one way, that did not exist. So this is where the conflicts are often with the Western model and the traditional model. So and this is where the way the regulatory framework, the international systems on the capital flight and all those things is caused dispossession, unfair sharing of resources with Indigenous people. But I strongly believe that this can be changed, and there is more voices now, that we're not going to go back to that same model we used before. There is sustainability goals at international level. Australia has signed the UNDRIP, United Nations Rights for Indigenous People. Also in 2007, Australia also said our 2018 legislations for underwater heritage are equally justify Indigenous rights in underwater heritage. So it's all out there, but how we're going to apply all of this in our system. So I worked with the United Nations. Often decision-making in culture is different than the decision-making in a regulatory framework in a Western way. Western ways promote equality, gender equality, and they are all nice things. But when we come to the cultural level, they are different. It would be very hard for my mom to explain these gender equality and things because she did not grow in an era, because she grew up in a very discipline where women, men, youth, children, grandparents, elders all have distinct roles, and this what keeps things in balance. Hence, we practice our culture and things Australia for 65,000 years very safely. We never had a war with each other for resources. There's no history of war among Indigenous people on resources. We have feud, but no grand scale wars, because everyone within the system had responsibility to care. I worked on international organization like United Nations in some conflict areas. The decision-making often sits with men in some cultures. Similarly, some decision, how the house is run, sits with women, men is just the provider. So same with in our Badimaya culture, the water, how you get to the water, that responsibility sits with the women. But how the water is used, distributed, that's the decision of men. So these is just little things that, intricate things that are important, needs to be understood if you come from a society of gender equality, culture, they need to be, because those laws define how resources can be distributed, allocated, and shared. So I gave this example previously. One of a hydrogeologist worked really hard on a water allocation plan in a land use agreement with the TOs. When it came to deliver and negotiate, the hydrogeologist was a female. She was told, you can't come. It's only a man's decision. So with our cultural sites, it's same. We have men's areas, women's areas where we do not go, totally do not go, because it is the way it is, because this defines, it brings discipline, it controls our temptations, so we are not breaking boundaries or we are hurting. So it builds that moral, ethical structure you're following, so you are considerate of everyone. So that's how it is seen. And so often we forget, when it comes to environmental impact assessment, or let's say mining even, we forget these little steps. And this is where problems come in, because regulator driven by regulatory, the investors driven by investment, and the culture gets torn in between those things, So I've seen it, and I strongly believe that this can be improved, especially when we move into critical mineral mining, because I said world is changing. The native title laws exist, United Nations rights for Indigenous people out there, which Australia is obligated in fulfilling them. And so when we do plan or assess, we need to look at how we're sharing these benefits, whose land it is, whose water they are, and engaging with them very early on, than later when things go bust, So I think in CSIRO, my role, so I had my own journey through all those challenges, problems, seen it, how our people were excluded in many, many areas, were not considered important in a way. They're considered important. I'll give you an example. In the regulatory framework, he said 21 days notification. And it's just a automatic letter generated by the system, and it goes to the stakeholder. There's no checks and balances, only who replies, then it comes to under attention. No one replies, that's it. But there is no going back and checking whether it's gone to the right people. Should I follow up or not? So if you have those kind of system in place, check them. Don't rely, because our mob is not going to reply. We are oral people. We engage, we talk, we sit down on the table. We build a relationship, we respect each other. So engaging early and really having that conversation is important, not going there saying, oh, I want to do this. No, what would you like to do? So it's a two-way conversation and talking to people. So decision making is hard, because if you don't understand their culture, if you understand the culture, like I worked with the United Nations, and I talked about a lot of family planning with the people around the globe. It was not the woman who's going to say, yes, I'm going to go on contraception. It's the man who decides. In Western culture, it's women's decision. In other cultures, similarly. So culture plays a very important role in people's, especially Indigenous people, because it sets boundaries, steps, how you get there, and discipline. It's not a prohibiting tool, it's an enabling tool, this is where that you probably hear the word co-design, the buzzword. That's the way. This is actually how co-design is. It's an enabling tool which embeds all those laws and governance of the culture to get you from A to B. It's not it shouldn't be seen as a disabling factor, and I've seen it. That's how a lot of people, because they want to bang, 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 So you have a question, Romana?
Oh, no, it's fantastic, Humera. I don't want to, distract your train of thought at all, but it was something that you was touching on. That was something we discussed. And as always, you wanting it to be quite an interactive meeting. So if anyone did have any questions of the participants, feel free to pop them in the chat. Also, they're able to unmute themselves as well. But I guess sort of what you were touching on there, I was wondering, how are you approaching the decision-making when working across these different cultural contexts and the sorts of strategies that you've found to be able to integrate these First Nations perspectives?
That's a very good question. Like with my role as Indigenous Science and Research Development team, like I don't take these colorful pamphlets and things because they are basically telling you, dictating you. I take a different approach. I said, look, this is what we do. What do you want? Let's see if I can tailor it around. Because CSIRO is big. We have different areas of science, and 99% of the time I can fit the idea. So I go there and I just present. I said, this is where the world is going. This is the things out there. How do you see it? And this is get the thinking started, And when I see that in, I tell you, I get the most amazing science innovation ideas from the Indigenous people, They some are in health, some in the beauty, some in the food, some in the mining. So I really water and all those things. So it's just talking, engaging, and asking, what do you want? What do you aspire? If you marry their aspiration with your goals, you will nail it, Yeah, so that's how I go about and engaging with them, with the Indigenous people on their aspiration, because everyone's aspirations is different and priorities are different. And at the moment, I can say children are, if you go to a community and ask them, like last week, I was in a seminar and there was an Indigenous presenter and one of the member asked them, what would you like? What is most important? And they said, our children are most important at the moment for us. So that's removing everything else. Children are important. I was in Pilbara 3 weeks ago and talking to one of the Indigenous organization and how the systems are designed to help them, but also not helping them. For example, community provides housing. Housing is a crisis. Community provide housing. One Aboriginal person who's got a house through community, 20 people live in the house, and for the living in the house, they're working in the mining, they deliberately not take a pay rise because they will lose the community housing. They meet the threshold. So we're not helping. So there's a system was set up to help housing crisis for the community, but we're still not inadvertently, we're not helping the community, So they deliberately don't take pay rise because if they take a pay rise, they lose the house, then 20 members of the community, family are homeless now, So this is what I advocate with organization, government agencies and things. So when you're developing policies, ensure that how that policy impacts, especially in a mining impacted towns and regions where government is providing services for community and how those services are impacted by the industry, the investors or their activities, and it creates that socio-economic divide, So it's very, very important that because mining company comes and pays a lot of money to people. And I early said, we share. If I got an auntie comes in, my money is not my money. I share it. you know. So we share our money, we share our house, we share our food. So it is harder for us to be in a neutral family, mom, dad, and 2 children, you know. I have nieces and nephew, I'm mom for them as well. So my sister never asked me, where you taken my kids? They can jump in my car and I take them. You know, I don't need my permission, you know, and I don't need a permission to go and stay with my sisters or brothers or uncles or dad's uncles or mom's uncles, you know. It's just connect, it's a kinship that exists that sets those laws and rules for us that are important and respected. So when we make these policies and things and how they affect community in the region are also important, like geoscience probably plays a vital role in providing advice in geological activities around the state. Doing mapping is an important role of geoscience. Be mindful whose country we're flying to, you know, when they were doing mapping, making sure there was an example where I think Geoscience Australia or Geological Survey of Australia, WA, they wanted to do mapping and they did TO engagement. The important thing was emus because they wanted to do low flying, you know. So ensuring you're not doing, because emu will be sitting on eggs. If it's in a breeding season, you're going to be heading chopping their head off, you know. So being mindful of, so this is where I said environment and geology can work together, but knowing your season, knowing your ecological systems, how they work, when is the breeding season, when is the flowering season, when is the water coming and going, drying season, wet season. So for your surveys are done in an appropriate time with the appropriate season, so you're not causing those cultural, because in the desert country, emu is very important because it traveled a long way to come. You know, it came from Broome having 6 eggs. By the time it got to the desert, it will lay only 1 egg because there is this scarcity of food, you know.
Yeah.
So that's how, if we need to see, looking at Australia, how our story lines are and why we see, it may not sound important for someone that say, oh, why emu? But if you look at our storylines, why emu? Because that is our food source in the desert, you know. And if it's laying only 1 egg compared to 6 egg up near the coastal areas, so you know there's a evolution or there's a science as well. So if we know those things, we are all scientists. We all understand how science works. It's just applying that on the map of Australia and why those things that suddenly a bizarre thing pops up as an important, but look how our elders are telling this story from that storyline.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That touches on to, we've had a question in the chat as well. So we've had one from Matthew talking about an interaction with an elder in northern New South Wales. There's quite a lot of detail in the chat, but I guess, their overarching question is how they can approach them to build trust and ensure that any exploration aligns with their values and permissions. And he wants to honour their wishes and involve them in a way that's respectful to their cultural heritage and traditions. Do you have any advice on that?
Yes, so like I said earlier, like it's engage with them, you know, just say, look, it's acknowledging it's their country, they know it better, I know, and knowing what they're doing and how that can be done better, you know. So describing what you doing and asking them what do they want, you know, what's their priority and less work. So strategically mapping. So I'll show you, it's not, it's some notes I took when I was listening to some people the other day when they were talking about science and research and things. Often we do not strategically, when we have a project, we need to look and map that project, you know, at social level, at economic level, at well-being level, you know. So if we measure these three things, you know, because social, if we measure the social level first and the well-being level, economic level will flow. The outcome will flow. So we often miss those two parts, you know. We just focus on the project, right? This is what it's going to deliver, but it's going to deliver cultural well-being. It's going to deliver social well-being. It's going to deliver economic well-being. So if we measure all those things in our project, I'm sure we will have a better delivery. So if this exploration can embed these three outcomes in their project, they will meet the mission they're on, will probably meet that. You know, there could be monetary compensation or non-monetary compensation. So I'll give you an example. I was working on one of the mine site, and these people, this tree, which is sacred, you know, this is Nusia floribunda. It's Christmas, it's got the bright yellow, reddish flowers. And we know the older tree have a spirit sits on it. That's Nyunga culture, the southwest, the very south. I knew that, but didn't know much details. And this is where they want to do clearing for mining, you know, because mining is always massive clearing. You clear everything and it's a bare earth. You stockpile the topsoil. And I said, look, this tree is important. Let's see if we can have a... So I engaged the TOs. They came in. We walked the country together. Only 11 trees they picked need to be protected. The rest can be clear. So there was win-win, you know. So it was a cultural outcome there, a well-being outcome. And they were barricaded and put aside. And only 11 trees over about 10, 20 hectares of land, you know. So mining can be done better, you know. It's just engaging and talking what you're doing and having that understanding and designing it together. So if it's a massive clearing, knowing what's out there on country could be a tangible or intangible heritage there. So for taking that into account in how we can, you know, yeah. So I hope it makes sense.
No, that made sense to me. I guess there's also the opportunity if Matthew wanted to unmute and add anything else specific to his question, but.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, g'day everyone. That does make a lot of sense. I've just found personally within my own kind of efforts at times to speak to traditional owners, it can be hard to find the right people to talk to, and the people that actually still carry that knowledge. And when I asked this particular elder about the area, he didn't really want to share with me the knowledge. So it's kind of a little bit of a roadblock, you know. It's like, well, I would love for you to give me more information. If there's, look at a map together, tell me where exactly we're talking about. A big area. Can you tell me specifically where the sacred sites are? but yes, I didn't receive a fantastic response. It was just sort of like, no, it's all sacred. Just don't go there.
Yeah. So probably that's good, Matthew. Because you probably sometimes it's seen that you're just taking from me what's for me, So yeah, you had the right
Yeah.
question to go and ask where that's because your intention is to not to hurt or damage those sacred sites, but how you approached it is, did you reflect on that? How you
Yes,
approached
and
it?
yeah, listening to what you've just said actually, and putting them first and aligning my interests with what they want is something I wasn't aware of. So yeah, thank you so much.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
going to their organization, their peak body, because they have their own governance and everyone is different. Like, for example, Yanjibandi community, their governance have 6 principles. Desert community have 5 governance system to follow. Another community, the Barab one, the Peninsula community, have 8 governance principles to follow. So we don't necessarily know their governance, So if you go with the right, instead of you telling people because country is living. Well, let me describe you the country. Country is breathing, living. It's part of me. The concept of country is very different. In in the Western way, land can be owned, sold, kept. I am above the everything else. In our culture, I am part of a system, and country is living and breathing. Country governs me, country drives me, not the other way around. So it's a holistic view of the world. It's not a siloed line. This is water, this is rocks, this is tree, this is, why conservation efforts fail? Because we focus on one animal's saving. But holistically, that animal has lot of other connection to it, So we have a holistic view of the world, not a siloed tunnel view. So the rocks, the landscapes, the waterways, they are all intertwined to tell us a story, and those stories and the red flags within that landscape, that bird eye view, determine where the important events undertaken hence become sacred sites, or whether tangible or intangible. So having that view, the holistic view, and feeling yourself part of country, not excluding yourself, being superior, that you will have a better outcome in engaging and in a much more respectful sense, that because you are part of the system, you're not driving the system, So
yeah.
yeah.
That all makes so much sense. Thank you so much. That's fantastic, actually. Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
No worries. So so like there's so many examples I can give you, but I'll leave it there at this stage. Yeah.
Perfect timing, Humera. We've just had another question. Do you want me to read it out? Will that be easiest? If you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So we've just had a question come from Adichie. Sorry, did I feel free to jump in if they would prefer to ask their question unmuted as well.
Hello.
Oh,
Hi, I'm Aditi. Thank you so much, Humera, for the talk and for explaining. As I wrote in the comment, I also come from India, And we also come from these communities where we kind of think of rivers and lands and trees as our family members. So, yeah, thank you so much. And I was just wondering that is it that globally the indigenous communities have some sort of fundamental idea where we think of the nature around us as a part of us, is it?
Yeah, like I know the internationally United Nations recognizes there's about 370 indigenous people still exist to this day. They still live, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders are one of them. I know in the First Nation people in North America and things, their idea of this connectivity, they're more seen as a carer of the lands and forests and water, you know. In our culture, because we are part of them, so we have the obligations set up differently, you know, compared to, so their role stops once they cared, they looked after, it's grown, they stop. In Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, that does not stop. It goes on. It goes to generation. It goes to the children, passed down. You know, so it's an oral history, oral culture for that holistic connection to the country that includes land, water, air, and everything within it, you know. So the responsibility and the meaning and terminology of caring for country is different from different indigenous cultures. In Australian context, it's the highest level. It's the strongest one because the respect is the highest there. It doesn't stop, you know. So you keep going back. So and the benefit you get, because it puts the country in a perspective that you are respectfully benefiting from the country and giving back at the same time. So it's a two-way of doing it. It's not you cared, you looked after, you moved on, you cared, you moved. No, it's sort of taking. So there was another example up north. I did a heritage one. It's a chalk mining for paint and things in the Dogoman, Waterman country. And there was a Zamia palm. And that Zamia palm come from the east, which is like 1,300 kilometers north of Queensland, coming all the way to sort of Kimberley way, you know, totally different species. And that Zamia palm was dated. It was almost 13 to 14,000 years old. Because it's a dry, arid environment, so this was a gesture giving back to the country. It's not that Zamia palm became a pest. That's how the cultural obligations are. So when we're giving back, we know the country, when it was given back, it doesn't become a weed and a pest, you know. So there's only one, still to this day, there's one Zamia palm there. It was probably brought there as a food source because local food sources were there, and the probably workforce was coming from there. So, you know, you get the seed, you cook it in the fire and you eat it, and there's a little pipe. So it's a sacred area. So whenever there was mined something or taken from the land, a sacred sign giving back is established there, that there's a story, a song line that connected to that area that is giving back. So your care doesn't stop, you know. So it goes on and on and on. So yeah. So yeah, it's good to know. I know I worked with some Rajasthan desert people, how they give back to their, because I like traveling, you know. So I've seen they build their homes deliberately to this day. They build their homes with the local material because when it dies, it blends with the landscape, so it is not causing damage, you know. Yeah, but these indigenous cultures are nowadays being influenced by social media. Yeah.
Humera, I was hoping I could ask a question. It might be the last one because I noticed we're getting close to time. I know that you would have seen and everyone has seen that there's been some really horrible examples of mining companies disrespecting country and destroying culturally very, very significant sites. And rightly, as a result of that, there's distrust between a lot of communities on country where mining companies are operating or trying to operate. As individuals, is there a way that we can work to try and rebuild those relationships, knowing that, you know, there is no justification for what has been done? But if those relationships are damaged, how do we start to rebuild?
Acknowledging is important, Erin, you know, like that's what I say, because once you acknowledge the mistake, the healing starts, you know. So acknowledging the mistakes, black and white, without any defensive position, you know, and then going back and embedding the elements of justice in your working arrangements is important. And also with the investors, because I said earlier I was in the sale of a mine too, from my life experiences, you know, and I had these international buyers come in and I was showing them around the mining tenement. This is really an interesting story. And I was in the car and I always, I don't want to go that part that you don't sound Aboriginal, you don't look Aboriginal. That's very disrespectful questions. I was in the car and I don't know what the mindset of people for Aboriginal or Aboriginal sound or Aboriginal look. We are diverse as well, you know. I was sitting in the car and showing these tenement boundaries to these investors. They are international investors, non-Australian. And he said, "Oh, where is the fence? Where is your tenement fence? Where is?" And I said, "Well, it's a big tenement. You can't put a lot of fences everywhere, you know. We have fences for pests like dingo fence and rabbit proof fence." But he was looking for, I said, the processing area, the active processing, active mining area, that's where the fence is, not the whole of tenement, you know. He said, "Okay." So you said, "Oh, you don't have barbed wires." No, you don't need barbed wires. Who's going to come here? So I'm not understanding what they used to. They're not understanding how mining is done in Australia, you know, because I never seen an overseas mining. Then later I learned basically. So, and then he comes into the security gate and the security checks your pass and things. And he goes like, "Oh, your security guards don't have guns." You know? And I said, no, why would they need guns? They're not for the guns. It's illegal, actually, under the mining laws. It's illegal to bring guns on site, you know? So then, and again, they're going a bit strangely looking at us. Then we jumped in the car again. And then he said, "Where are the natives?" Which is, you know, and I was looking, I said, "What do you shoot the natives?" So you see, so Mineral Science Australia, Geoscience WA, whoever, we need that education for these investors coming to our land, that respect, you know. So when they're coming and investing in Australia, ensuring they have that understanding. We don't have guns for our security guards. We don't barbed wire our mine sites. We do not shoot natives, if that's the word they want to use, you know. So because they used to, that is normal in those countries. Then later when we sat down for lunch, then I said, you asked me a lot of strange questions. Can you please tell me where these questions are coming from? So they were mining in Africa. In Africa, they put barbed wires on the fences. The security guards have authority to shoot, and they will shoot the local people if they come on the mine site. You know, so education is very, very important. If we are inviting investors to come and invest in our country, that's very important because that's the start of breaking relationship. I am an Aboriginal person sitting in the car. My forehead doesn't say that, you know. And I was like, if that's the mentality of coming, I'm not going to give you my land or my country, my water, you know. You're not, but I knew that we don't embed this level of training, education at that level of the international transaction level in investments and things, you know. So it's very important that education, I think, piece is very, very important, you know. So.
Thank you.
Any
Thank
question?
you so much, Ramona. I will, yeah, I mean, if you're happy to stay on, sorry, Humera for a little while longer, we are at the end of our hour session, but if anyone has any other questions, and Humera is happy to answer those, please pop them in the chat or unmute and ask Humera. In just before people head off, in case they do have other meetings or things to go to, I'd just like to extend a really warm thank you, Humera, for taking the time to share your experience and advice with us. It's been really, really invaluable and wonderful to hear from you. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you. No, the reason I said embedding those 3 elements in your programs is important is closing the gap, Aboriginal empowerment strategy and government new national science priorities. Number 3, embedding Indigenous knowledge system. So it's very important because my non-Indigenous great-grandfather had to sell his properties because he knew that he can't give it to his Aboriginal kids. So past policies prohibited us having this intergenerational wealth and things. So it's very, very important to consider those government priorities when you're planning and programming for any activities on land or waters, you know? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I hope it was helpful.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, I wanted to more interactive, but that's okay. I
So
felt like I wanted to be the part of the team and have that conversation, you know?
Yeah.
It's, you know, as always, it's an utter delight to hear from you, Humera.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay.
All right.
Okay, guys.
Bye,
You
everyone.
have a lovely day.
You too.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.